For decades, the powerful told us to look the other way. They said Jeffrey Epstein was just one man, just one monster. But today, inside Congress, for the very first time, a survivor stood up and told her story, breaking years of silence. And what Representative Jasmine Crockett revealed afterwards makes one thing clear. This was never just about Epstein. This was about a system built to protect predators and silence victims.
So much. And first of all, let me just say that we are standing before you. We're having this conversation because of the oversight Democratic leadership. And so I want to reiterate that it's the Democratic leadership on oversight that has truly been able to move this forward. I'm sure many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we have the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this, because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the Oversight Committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding, because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process. Not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers, and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found, and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. One of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward, I am asking that you trust oversight DIMS and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
What we just witnessed from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not just another speech in Washington. This was a direct confrontation with one of the darkest stains in modern American justice, the Epstein scandal. And what made this moment so powerful is that for the first time, a victim stood up publicly in a congressional forum to tell her story. Think about that. After decades of silence, intimidation, and cover-ups, a survivor was finally given space to speak in front of lawmakers. That is historic. But Crockett didn't just leave it at emotion. She drew attention to something deeper, the failures of institutions that were supposed to protect victims. She reminded us that this wasn't just about one predator. Epstein's crimes were not the work of a single man operating in the shadows. They were part of a sophisticated system, a network of enablers, from the wealthy elites who funded him, to the banks that moved his money, to the staff who facilitated his crimes, to Ghislaine Maxwell, who Crockett called what she truly is, a monster, not a victim. And when Crockett mentioned RICO, she was absolutely right. The Epstein case is the textbook definition of organized crime. Multiple actors working together deliberately over decades across state and even national borders. And yet, the justice system never treated it with the seriousness it deserved. That failure has consequences. Crockett pointed out how victims from the 1990s through the 2000s suffered because law enforcement, prosecutors, and powerful figures chose to look away or cut deals. Think about former U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who brokered a secret plea deal for Epstein in 2018 without even informing the victims, violating their rights under the Crime Victims Act. That was not just negligence, that was systemic corruption, where the powerful protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And that's why what Crockett is pushing for matters. She demanded answers about why Ghislaine Maxwell was quietly moved from a Florida facility to Texas. And she called for bipartisan support behind legislation to close the loopholes in victims' rights laws. That matters because every time the system fails to notify, every time the system quietly transfers a convicted trafficker, it chips away at accountability and sets the stage for history to repeat itself. Now, here's what we should take away. Crockett is exposing something that many Americans feel but rarely see acknowledged in Congress: the government's track record of sweeping scandals under the rug, especially when they implicate powerful elites. The Epstein case is not just a story about abuse. It's a story about the imbalance of power in America. It's about how wealth and influence can bend the law, delay justice, and silence victims. And unless Congress digs deeper, unless every file is released, unless every enabler is named, then the cycle will continue. But Crockett also issued a challenge to us, the public. She asked that if anyone has information, if anyone knows where documents or evidence may be, to bring it to the oversight Democrats. Because she understands what many already suspect. We don't know the full story. We don't know who else was involved, and we don't know how much the Department of Justice actually investigated. The secrecy around Epstein's network is not accidental, it's intentional. And transparency is the only way forward. So this isn't just about one congressional roundtable. This is about accountability. It's about sending a clear message that no one, no matter how wealthy or connected, is above the law. And it's about making sure victims' voices are never again ignored, silenced, or sidelined in the name of protecting power. And here's where we come in. If you care about transparency, if you believe victims deserve justice, then don't just watch this story fade away. Stay engaged. Support legislation that strengthens victims' rights. Hold your representatives accountable, and keep demanding the release of every single Epstein file, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if we want to stop trafficking and exploitation, it starts with breaking the culture of cover-ups. So the question is not just what Congress will do next. The question is, will we as a people demand the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is and no matter who it implicates? Because justice, real justice, cannot survive on silence.